Hello, this is, I think, going to be the last video I make for this semester. This one's on Captain Fantastic, um, and I'm going to send you something I pulled offline, which is like a sort of like a family tree showing the different characters in this film and um, people's names, how they're related. Uh, it just helps out at the beginning of studying something to have a visual map of who's who. All right, so I'll send you that later. Um, this is, of course, the movie that you'll be writing your final essay on, and um, that will be during final exam week. I'll set it up so that you can write that anytime from Tuesday through Friday of final exams week. And you'll notice maybe on the assignment sheet, the topic sheet that I gave you at the beginning of the semester, there are two questions on Captain Fantastic, and you should prepare to write on either one of those, and then on um, when you go to take the test, you'll find out which of those two you're going to write on. Right, so you need to be a little bit flexible. Plan to write for either, but um, you'll only be writing one of those two. Okay. Um, I do that, of course, because this is supposed to be a spontaneous paper that you write on the spot, and so that's a way of helping to ensure that. So the title, I guess I want to begin with the title of the movie. Captain Fantastic is a sort of a misleading title because it sounds as though it's going to be a superhero movie, and it's not, of course. The title must be referring to Ben Cash, who's the father of the family, um, and it's maybe an ironic title that he's um, not really a superhero, but maybe he imagines himself to be or is trying to be something superhuman. Um, and at a certain point in the movie, he says that he's trying to save their lives, and so um, there's a point on page 78 in the screenplay where Relian, the middle son, the rebellious one, um, says to Bodovin, the older boy, he says, "Dad's dangerous. You think Dad's so great? Dad's dangerous." Um, and there's a certain way in which by the end of the movie you begin to think maybe that title is ironic in another way. He's trying to save their lives, and he comes to think that maybe he um, is he's an incompetent parent. He's willing to give up his children to his in-laws because he's worried that he's an unsafe parent, that he's dangerous. Right? There's also this theme in the movie of missions, like we're gonna free the food when they rob the grocery store, or mission free mom when they're gonna liberate her cadaver and cremate it. And there's liberate Relian when he's in the grandparents' house, and Vesper is um, going to go rescue him. So there is this kind of sense in which you know, he seems to be running their family like a superhero, I guess. I think you know I'd also like to point out that this fits into our theme of outsiders and insiders that we've been looking at all semester long. Um, Most of the people that we've looked at in the stories are characters who've been kind of kicked to the curb by society. They're outsiders, not because they want to be, but because they've been rejected by society or left behind. Um, but then there are some characters, like the Hunger Artist and the main character in that comic, a graphic short story called The Party. Both of them are outsiders by choice. They're trying to be outsiders. Sometimes people are rejected by society. Sometimes they reject society. And this is a movie about people who have, who've decided to abandon society, and um, they seem extreme. But once you've watched, once you've been kind of absorbed into this movie, the first half an hour or so where you're kind of adapting to what their lifestyle is, then by the time we get to the funeral and the grandparents' home, then that world seems strange and foreign to us. So, um, you know, we all exist somewhere on the spectrum between conforming to what society wants and rebelling against what society wants. This is a movie about, it looks at the two extremes, extreme conformity and extreme rebellion, and it's a movie really about trying to find the right balance, which each of us need to do, I guess, for ourselves. Find out how much do we participate in our society and how much do we resist it. Okay, well, so Ben Cash, the father, um, he obviously he and perhaps Leslie, the mother, who's dead, and she's not really in the movie except she's kind of a ghost in the movie. She's there, but we don't really hear from her. But the two of them together, seemingly, decided to move into the wilderness, and it's not clear whether Ben is the driving force behind it or whether Leslie was, but um, obviously they there's a lot they object to in contemporary America. Um, on page 60, no, it's on page 56 in the screenplay. Um, in the scene where um, Ben is at his sister Harper's house, and his brother-in-law Dave um, says to where are we here? This is page 6.4. Yes, sorry, I've got a different. The screenplay I'm using has different page numbers, so I'm juggling my page numbers versus the page numbers in the screenplay I gave you. Um, on page 56, Dave says, Harper and I have been talking. The kids need stability, structure. Like normal kids, they need to go to a real school so they can get real jobs. Um, so, what is it they're doing out there in the woods? Harper says, You're going to get them killed. Do you have any idea what you're doing to them? And Ben says, Saving their lives is what I'm doing. And Harper says, Oh, don't be ridiculous. So he sees it as somehow saving their lives. Um, and, there's stuff in the movie that, we begin by seeing them out in the woods. As I said, we kind of adapt to what they're doing there. And then when their mother dies and they leave the woods to go back into society, then we have a point of comparison and we can kind of analyze what's sick or unreal about the modern world. Um, Dave says they need to go to a real school so they can get real jobs and live in the real world. Um, well, as they're leaving their their home in the wilderness, um, they the bus is going along through some pretty ugly industrial areas and some pretty ugly um, commercial shopping districts and strip malls and things like that. And Ben comments on it by, making fun of, he takes on the voice of a commercial announcer and says things like, "Come on down, we're having, these prices are just insane," kind of mocking modern America like he's a tour guide on a bus. Um, so the when they get to near um, near um, New Mexico, where this is on page 95 of your screenplay. When they get near New Mexico, where his in-laws live, um, then we see, again, I'm juggling page numbers here. Um, 70.8. Yeah, when they're at the grandparents' house, this is a different passage from what I thought I was looking for. When they get to their grandparents' house, and Ben decides that he's gonna leave the kids there. Most of the kids, except Relian, don't want to do that. And Nye says, "I don't want to live here," and Zaja says, "This house is a vulgar display of wealth." And Keeler says, "And an unethical use of space." So there's these critiques that the modern world, contemporary world that they've left behind, is that they have moral objections to it. That a house that big is an obscenity. That somebody would have that much when other people have so little. And what's the purpose of that house? They're claiming the house is just to display wealth. If we look on page 73, as they're approaching New Mexico, and this is what I was looking for earlier, on page 73, there's a description of the landscape as they're pulling up. Yeah, there's the description of the landscape where it describes how they're coming along the expressway, and they're obviously in the desert. It's New Mexico, and the land is brown and dry, and then suddenly there are these bright green patches with sprinklers going, and it's a golf course, right? And there's it doesn't make sense that in the middle of the desert there should be grass and um, that much water being pumped in artificially. So I think there's several ways in which the landscape is shown to be kind of fake, and um, the church when they arrive there, and the Bertrain's house, the Jack and Abby, the grandparents' house, is it's nice in the sense that it's clean and modern and so forth, but it's all just kind of sterile and um, without any kind of character. It doesn't, it could be any place. There's also page B here. There's also, the quote unquote normal kids that we see in the movie, and we could question, what's wrong with them, or what's the critique that's being made of them. There's the Beau's girlfriend Claire that he meets at the campground, and there's nothing too much wrong with her. She just seems kind of ordinary. Doesn't know much. There's this contrast between what she knows, which is a lot of popular culture, and what Baudevin knows, which is a lot of book culture. And then there's Harper's kids, the cousins, Jackson and Jason. They seem, the critique against them is that they're they're also totally absorbed in popular culture, and um, they're ignorant about important things like the Bill of Rights. They really don't have a clue, but they know all about Nikes and Adidas's um, and video games and um, Xbox and so forth. They're addicted to electronics. That's another critique that we see of them. And they go down in the basement and play this horribly violent video game, and you see that they're into it, and all the cash children are they look horrified. um, um, and at the dinner table, we also see that Harper and Dave's kids are shielded from a lot of you know realities, like how Leslie died, and they're not allowed to have alcohol, and there's Ben reminds Dave that he swore at Leslie the last time they were there, um, and Harper and Dave seem shocked and say, "We don't use foul language in this house." And so there's this theme in the movie that um, um, conventional society, contemporary America, is in denial about a lot of things. That they deny a lot of important truths. Talk about death or illness in a very direct way. Um, Sexuality is hidden and forbidden. Um, Meat eating. There's a contrast between when they're at Harper and Dave's house and they're going to have chickens, and one of the little kids says, "Well, how did you kill this chicken?" "Oh, we didn't kill it. We got it at they're rotisserie chickens we got at the store." So she says they're organic, and as though that's I think she's hoping that this will fit Ben's values to say they're organic, but they're organic, but they came from a grocery store, not only pre-slaughtered and prepared, but even cooked, right? So it's you compare that scene with the opening scene where Bodevin is killing an elk with a knife in his bare hands, and then eating its what looks like its liver or its heart or something. Um, there's a strong contrast between um, the two families and their understanding of where their food comes from, something as basic as that. Um, the when the family goes to the bank on their road trip to withdraw some money, and they see a lot of overweight people, and they're shocked at that, and what's wrong with all these people? Why are they so heavy? Um, it's an unrealistic scene in a way, because everybody in that room is overweight, but it's not too far from the truth in American society. It's the obesity is all around us, um, and we eat unhealthy foods, I guess. It's another theme in the movie when they go to the to the diner, and the kids see pancakes and hamburgers and milkshakes and fries. Um, Ben takes them. They leave. They leave the restaurant because he says they don't have any real food here. Um, but the kids, of course, the kids seem really excited about it, and they want to try all this food. Which um, why do we eat stuff like um, you know soda and French fries and chocolate cake? Because they taste good. They're pleasurable to eat, but um, that doesn't mean that we should eat it, right? Because it's not good for you. And so Ben's values are you shouldn't just allow yourself to, the goals of contemporary society seem to be in this movie just to have physical comfort and safety, and kind of um, live in an artificial environment that's separate from the real world, or the natural world, I guess. Um, and of course, acquiring things is a important goal of the modern world. Buying and getting and owning things. Ben's goals, on the other hand, um, his goal in out in the woods, the life they're living out in the woods, the purpose seems to be to develop himself and especially his children to their fullest potential, right? Developing people to their highest potential. And if you think of goals or values, that's a very good one. That's developing his children to their highest potential. They do that physically, of course, through the training that they're doing, which um, is looks very rigorous. And when Keeler breaks her neck, um, the doctor says, doctor says that she's got the strength of an elite athlete. She's in amazing condition for a girl her age. So that's you'd have to say that's a good thing to be in, to kind of develop your body to its highest potential. And then they do the same thing with their minds. They have what looks like very challenging homeschooling where they're reading very difficult texts and studying physics and so forth. Um, so Ben's goals are to develop his kids to their highest potential, um, and then I guess you'd have to ask, well, what's the purpose of that? Um, to prepare them for life, I guess. Um, but if they live in the woods, then studying about human culture seems a little bit irrelevant, except maybe they can then understand, the human world out there that they have withdrawn from. Um, but, of course, if you are in tip-top physical shape and you stop exercising for a while, you'll lose that conditioning, and eventually you'll get old and you'll get weaker and die, and the intellect that you developed, everything will die with you. But still, it seems like a really core, kind of valuable, worthy goal to develop yourself to your fullest potential, and that way you can live. You can live the fullest kind of the fullest human life you can, and you can experience what life is, what it is in reality, and not sort of spend your life in what you could say is the artificial modern environment that we live in, the modern houses and airplanes and so forth. Um, well, so yeah, Ben and Leslie want to return back to what you could call some kind of an animal like existence. Now, they're not living entirely like animals, but they want to um, live in close contact with the natural world and, kind of wrestle their food and everything, not everything, but lots of things that they need from the natural world directly. And that seems, you could understand that as being, in some ways, more real because it's you're dealing with um, the natural environment as the world really is, not the artificial urban environment that people have made. Right? So a question is, how well equipped are these kids to live in the real world? And I cited that passage that where Dave says they need to go to a real school so they can get real jobs. But then there's also a passage on very bottom of page 85, where the grandfather says these kids are going to be totally unprepared for the real world. And Jack responds, I happen to think the opposite is true. So there's a question here about what do we mean by the real world? Um, what Ben would mean by the real world is um, planet Earth and the natural environment, where um, you eat something that you pull out of the environment, either killing an animal or harvesting um, harvesting plants from the environment. Um, Whereas what Jack, the grandfather, would say is that the real world is the world that most people live in, which is um, the human world, the world that people have made. We've made a physical infrastructure, buildings and highways and so forth, that are artificial, um, and we live at a real distance from from the animal world that we have animal bodies and we require food and water and sunlight and warmth and all those things, and we've figured out artificial means for acquiring those things, and means that keep us from close contact with nature. And so, there's a question in this story. What do we mean by the real world? Do we mean the real world of the natural environment, sort of the very basic kind of primal animal existence that human beings have lived for most of history, or the real world of um, you know work and school and stores and um, homes in the suburb and cars and so forth? That's real in the sense that that is in fact where most people live. Right? That's what's become real in a sense. Um, so, how well equipped are the kids to live in the real world? Well, um, there's the example of Bodovin, who on page 10 you see that he doesn't know how to interact socially when his dad um, when his dad um, when he's coming out of the store and there's some kids going into the store, some girls. His dad says, "Oh, go talk to him," and and Bodovin, the older boy, the adolescent boy, says, "Talk to him about what? Um, I don't I don't know anything. What do I talk to them about? Um, about Ask her what she thinks about working people creating an armed revolution against the exploiting classes and their state structures, whether or not she's a dialectical materialist and accords primacy to the class struggle." So, in other words, he's saying, all he knows is this um, high end academic stuff that he's read in books, and he doesn't know how to interact socially with people. Um, Later on in the story, on page 79 and 80, you see that, when he's interacting with Claire, um, and he's interested in her and she's interested in him, and he's trying to connect with her. And he's talking to her about his yoga, and um, he talks about Dr. Spock. And Dr. Spock is a physician writer from the 1950s who wrote books about raising children, and Claire thinks that he's talking about Mr. Spock from Star Trek, and so she's all about popular culture, he's all about academic culture, and he feels embarrassed, and she thinks he's strange. Right? She knows that nearly everybody knows about Star Trek, and so he is left feeling like the strange one. Um, but on the other hand, he does have an amazing amount of knowledge about book knowledge about Western civilization and human culture and so forth. He has way more knowledge of that kind than most people, children or adults, that he would run into. Um, and then there's the comparison between Justin and Jackson, who can't tell you what the Bill of Rights are, and Zaja, who can not only tell you what the Bill of Rights, not only can recite the Bill of Rights, but can comment on what they mean, right? So, you know, how well equipped are the kids to live in the real world? In some ways, they're super well equipped. They understand their situation way more completely than the normal kids do. But on the other hand, they're socially um, not equipped to fit in in the rest of society. So, all right, another angle I want to take on this is to think about, they've isolated themselves from society, but really, how isolated are they? How completely have they separated from the rest of society? They seem to have, they want to hold on to um, certain aspects of human culture that fit their philosophy. Um, yes, they live in the woods, but they have a bus, right? And on the bus, they have a lot of things that they can keep protected from the weather. They have tools like, weapons and climbing gear and ropes, and they have clothes. And yes, we see them killing a deer, but we also see them, um, cooking dried beans and so forth. So they've got they buy some of their food. They've got books, they've got musical instruments, so they're not really living off the land um, in any kind of extreme way. They really are still participating in human society, but at a distance. Right? They sort of trade with the straight world, the conventional world. Um, Also, you know, this homeschooling that they're doing, you could say they're isolated from the real world or the rest of the world in their schooling, because Ben is the one who's educating them. He's their teacher. But of course, what they're studying is not just science, which is about, you know, physics and so forth. We see one of the things that they're studying is physics, but they're mostly seem to be focused on classics of literature and philosophy and history, and they're learning all about human culture. Um, and you know, I, with a particular angle, um, they seem to be getting a lot of reading that's intended to critique modern society. Things that fit Ben's values. Um, so yeah, they're separated from normal society, but in another way, they seem, you know, um, very much aware of it, more aware of it, in fact, than a lot of people who are living in modern society, because they're studying it through um, academic texts, so that they'd have this kind of much more advanced understanding of their situation here on planet Earth. If we think about Leslie, the deceased mother, um, where is she in all of this? We talked about how the title is Captain Fantastic, and it seems to be about Ben, and um, he's their captain, he's their leader, um, and he's going to make them into these super children. What was the mother's part in all of this? She, we only see her in a couple of Ben's dreams, but near the end of the movie, when Abigail, the grandmother, is sharing a couple of letters with Ben, letters that um, Leslie wrote, on page 92, in the middle of page 92, you see, let me look it up for you here. Ben reads a couple of lines from the one, page 92, there we are. Abigail says, right before you called about getting her treatment, she sent me 2 letters. I wanted you to see. Read here. And Ben is reading. It says, you don't need to come and get me anymore. Burn the other letter. What Ben and I have created here may be unique in all of human existence. You can't understand. No one can. We've created a paradise out of Plato's Republic. Our children shall be philosopher kings. It makes me so indescribably happy. I'm going to get better out here. I know I will. So that sounds like everything's going great, and she is totally on board with the program that they're raising their kids under. But on the other hand, she refers to some other letter. Burn that other letter. That was the letter that her mother said she wrote to ask the parents to come and get her, to take her out of the woods. That she was not doing well. Right, she needed to be rescued. So what did she believe? That it was it was a horrible mistake, and she wanted to get away from what was happening in the woods, or it was the greatest possible imaginable thing. She was somebody who was bipolar. The story says she was manic depressive, is the old term for it. Bipolar disorder, you may have heard of, where people's moods swing from deep, deep depression up to this tremendously excited mania, where everything seems great and they make all these plans, and then they crash and they're profoundly depressed. That was her problem, and she ended up killing herself, presumably in one of the depressive parts of the cycle. So then, knowing that about her, we have to wonder, well, what did she actually believe? Who was she? We know one thing is she secretly helped Bodovin apply to colleges, which suggested that she was not completely on board with what was going on, and she wanted to try to. She did it secretly, which suggests that she knew Ben wouldn't have agreed. It makes it seem as though he was the one who was kind of controlling things. But on the other hand, one of the motives for why they came out to the wilderness was for her to get better. Ben says that they were hoping this would be good for her mental health, because it is a fact that exposure to nature is useful for people who are depressed. But on the other hand, being in the woods would have isolated her from friends and family and other people. And here during the COVID-19 pandemic, maybe some of us are discovering that our mental health sags a little bit when we're isolated from other people. I'm doing fine, by the way, but not everybody does. So, okay. It seems like Ben, being their captain, it makes it sound like he's a military leader, Captain Fantastic, giving orders and so forth. And he does run them like a drill sergeant. He seems like he can be pretty rigid and demanding. And he's the only one that we see in the movie, so we don't know what Leslie was like in running this family. And we don't know whether, this was something that was imposed on her, that Ben has this strong personality and he insisted on it, or whether this was something mutual, or, as I said, maybe, the other half of the title is Fantastic, Captain Fantastic. It seems as though the screenwriter Matt Ross is maybe trying to bring in the idea of fantasy. That living in the woods is sort of this fantasy that you can escape the modern world and live in this ideal place. She was somebody who was manic, and maybe this idea of retreating to the woods and living some ideal life was some um, unrealistic plan of hers. Um, but she's gone, and after she's gone, um, what happens at the end of the movie is that Ben compromises, and he backs away from his life in the woods, and that happens um, partly because of the accident that Keeler has falling from the roof. It kind of wakes him up to the fact that maybe what he's doing with the kids is too rigorous and demanding and dangerous, and um, you know the upside of the life that he's chosen is that you become this superhuman being. The downside is that there are risks. When they're climbing the rock face and one of them slips, he doesn't fall, but as Ben points out to him, there's nobody who can rescue you. You got to do it yourself. That's kind of dangerous. So, you know, I guess again, thinking of the pandemic that we're living through right now, um, we're making the same kind of calculation. How much do we want to? How much do we want to keep ourselves safe versus how much do we want to enjoy a fuller life, right? Um, and so um, Ben had previously, wanted to live away from human society, um, but in the end, he's, in the film he calls it a beautiful mistake. Near the end of the movie, he says, going to the woods it was a beautiful mistake, meaning, you know, it's appealing, but it was not the right choice. And he's willing to abandon that, and he's also willing to abandon his children to his in-laws, which is a pretty dramatic thing. He's come to think of himself as, as kind of dangerous, as Relian said earlier. His ideas are extreme and could lead to, they put his kids in danger, right? But the last scene, the final scene, is that we see them in a real house, and they're going to be getting on a school bus going to a real school, real in quotation marks, right? Um, what I mean by that, or I guess what most people would mean by that, is that they live in a conventional house. It looks like it's an old farmhouse in the country, but it's a real house. And they've turned their bus into a chicken coop, and they're going to a conventional school. So you could say in the end he sold out, or you could say in the end he adjusted his stance towards society, his position towards society. Um, it looks like he sold out, but if you step back and think about the household that we see at the very end of the movie, that would not be really considered a conventional household. If you if you visited that household, you would see that as being some people who are living very differently from most other people in America. But by comparison with what they did before, you can see that it's much more mainstream and conventional. So, you know, Ben has moved his family back, um, kind of reattached them to um, the straight world, normal society, um, and is still, pursuing his values, but kind of made a compromise with the real world. 44 minutes and 59 seconds, 45 minutes. Um, we're at the 45-minute mark, which is just about a class period. I think I'm done, and this is my last video for the semester. I hope everybody's doing okay. I hope you like that movie. And please do let me know if you have any questions about the final exam, or it's not a final exam, final essay, or anything else that you need to finish up the semester. All right, take care.